I have to be honest, I never really loved the original Steam Deck. Controversial, I know, but the somewhat dull display and the pretty rubbish battery life meant I didn't really enjoy gaming on it all that much. I know it was the first one out the gate and it spawned these guys, but I'm here to talk about this, the new Steam Deck OLED. I've been using it for the best part of a month now, and it is so much better. I absolutely love this, to the point where, despite the ROG Ally and the Lenovo Legion Go here offering better performance and new bells and whistles, and yes, even a kickstand, which I am very jealous of, I think this still may be the best one to go for. So think of this as the Steam Deck 1.5. Valve have tweaked to upgraded almost every part, and while we still get basically the same chunky plastic design, this new one fixes most of my issues I had with the original. This new OLED screen is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, it's OLED for a start rather than LCD, so you get those nice deep inky blacks as the cliche goes. It's brighter, it supports HDR, and they've bumped the refresh rate from 60 to 90 Hz, which makes everything feel a whole lot smoother. Well, assuming the game you're playing does actually hit 90 FPS, which is easier said than done. Battery life is just ridiculously better, like up to 50% better thanks to the bigger 50 watt-hour battery and a more power-efficient display and 6nm processor. And while on paper performance should be roughly the same as before, it's using the same chip even if it's a slightly more efficient version of it, and it does not compete with the much faster Z1 Extreme from AMD that we get in the ROG Ally and Legion Go. Sadly, these are more powerful, we'll talk more about that in a minute. Actually, the frame rates on this are actually far more stable than before, meaning fewer frame drops and just a much smoother overall experience. Plus, it's cooler, it's quieter, it's about 5% lighter. They've redesigned the thumbsticks, which make them more comfortable. And what else we got? Wi-Fi 6E is quite a nice jump from Wi-Fi 5 that we had on the old one. There is also a new Bluetooth antenna, which supports multiple controllers, so you can play split screen on here. And it also now means you can use your Bluetooth earphones or headphones as a microphone for chatting in-game, which bizarrely you can't on that. And most importantly, the power button is now orange. So it's a genuine end-to-end refinement and just makes this feel a bit, well, prototypey in comparison. This is what it should have been the whole time. I understand that it just wasn't possible to get a good 90 Hz OLED screen back, well, when this launched a few years ago, but it just feels like this has unlocked the potential the Steam Deck always had. Now you have a couple of options. There's a 512GB or 1TB OLED option, and also the updated LCD version, which now gets a 256GB SSD, which is a massive upgrade from the base 64GB eMMC that we used to have, and that's kept the same price as before. So storage on the new OLEDs has doubled versus last year, with only a £20-ish bump on the mid-spec and the same price at the top spec, which now gets a much more usable 1TB. And to be honest, I think that's pretty good value, but still for me I would go with the 1TB as it's only about £90 more for double the storage, plus you get this anti-glare etched glass. And you also get this carry case, which inside has a much more compact liner that you can pull out, which makes this whole thing a lot less cumbersome to carry around. Whichever model you go for though, you can expand the storage via microSD, but that will be slower than the internal storage and also still cost you a few quid, so probably best just to go for the 1TB. So like the older Steam Deck, this is a handheld gaming PC to basically just play your Steam library. And given the gaming performance is solid, if not perhaps amazing, it's better suited for indie games, especially if you want to hit that 90 Hz, or AAA titles if you're happy to hit 30 to 40 FPS, or maybe some console emulation of your old favorites. Now, the fact that this runs SteamOS is both the best thing and possibly the worst thing about it. It's based on Linux, and SteamOS is incredibly slick and easy to use, but it does only give you access to your Steam library. Although if you're happy to get your hands dirty, you can access and install other game libraries via the Linux desktop via the power menu, but it's a bit clunky and not nearly as easy as accessing other game stores on these guys, which run Windows 11. On the other hand, SteamOS easily beats Windows with an app overlay for ease of use and bugs. This thing is responsive, everything is easy to find, and you do still have a few options to tweak performance, scaling, and frame rate locks. But if you just want an easy life to play your Steam library, then this definitely makes sense. Although, not all games play nicely with the deck's controls by default, so there's a handy deck verified, playable, and unsupported labels to tell you how well each game works. Verified or playable games remap controls to the deck's layout automatically, and it gives you a nice overview of the controls as you launch each game. But then games that have been untested are listed as unknown, although you can then build a custom layout yourself. But let's talk about this gorgeous OLED display. As I say, I've got the 1TB here, so it's got that etched glass, so it does cut down on reflections a little bit. It's pretty similar actually to the original Steam Deck. Compared with the LCD on the regular deck, the colors, the blacks, the extra clarity, especially off angle, the viewing angles are much improved. The screen is a massive upgrade, but you do kind of need to see it with your own eyes. I feel like the difference just doesn't come across that well on camera. It's also brighter, going from 400 to 600 nits in SDR, and also now with a 1000 nit option for HDR, although of course the brighter you go, the faster it will drain your battery. And also for any game that can max out that 90Hz refresh rate, or at least gets anything over 60 FPS, that extra smoothness on top of the OLED image quality bump is a night and day difference. And the response times are also 10 milliseconds faster on this OLED display compared to the previous LCD, and also the reduced system input lag makes everything just feel a lot snappier. So OLED is obviously very nice, but it doesn't have a 120 or 144 Hz refresh rate like we do with these guys. Also, these support VRR, or variable refresh rates, which can help smooth out your frame rate. So while this is more stable, and we'll come to performance in a second, it would have been nice to have a VRR screen. So in some ways, these are better gaming displays, even if they're not OLED. But then they also have that beefier Z1 Extreme processor to really take advantage of that higher refresh. And on the Steam Deck, you can make everything feel more consistent by locking the frame rate to 30 or 60. Also, the new HDR mode, especially in games like Spider-Man Remastered, is where this new panel looks its absolute best. The problem is though, HDR is limited to HDR-enabled games, which is disappointing as there aren't a ton of these on PC. In terms of design, this hasn't really changed much compared to this guy. Yes, we have the orange power button and slightly refined joypad thumbstick things, but on the outside it's largely the same. And in terms of size, it's pretty much a halfway house between the ROG Ally and the Lenovo Legion Go. This is a big boy. Although I would say, in terms of what feels most premium, I think I have to give it to the Ally. It's got that sort of compact size, it's got the nice RGB lighting, it just feels a bit nicer to hold. And of course the Lenovo is a bit of a monster actually. We've got the biggest screen, and you can also detach the controllers on the Legion Go, which gives you a bit more, well, versatility if you want to game like this. So between the three, I think the ROG Ally is probably my favorite in terms of design and feel, but the Steam Deck is close behind, and while it is a bit sort of plasticky and engineering, prototypey feeling, it is very comfortable to hold in your hand, and I do appreciate how much cooler and quieter it is now compared to the old one. The new Steam Deck is also 27 grams lighter, which is just about noticeable, and while the thumbsticks have had a bit of a redesign to be a little bit chunkier and grippier, the touchpads and the buttons are all the same as the old deck. My B button did stick sometimes, and I would like a bit more haptic feedback. They're also using new Torx screws, which makes it much simpler for opening this up for modding or repairing. And you can even replace the M2 drive if you want more or faster storage instead of bunging in a microSD. Let's see what this can do and how much faster it is, if at all, than the old one. My main takeaway is that performance is a lot more consistent, with fewer frame drops in more demanding games like Baldur's Gate 3 or Cyberpunk, but the big surprise for me was how this does give you a few extra FPS, and that's down to having 16% more memory bandwidth and also the more efficient 6nm processor, which uses less power so it can maintain higher GPU clock speeds for longer, less throttling. In Baldur's Gate 3, I averaged a couple of FPS higher at native 800p, but it was the lack of stutter and frame drops that was the most obvious. Although considering the ROG Ally with the Z1 Extreme chip can hit similar FPS at 1080p, shows just how much more power that thing has to offer. The new Steam Deck OLED also averaged a 12% higher frame rate in Spider-Man Remastered, and as with Baldur's Gate 3, FSR2 upscaling is great to keep things feeling smooth. In Cyberpunk, I only got 1 extra FPS, although I'll take it, but again, less stutter means it doesn't feel like it's struggling so much. And this thing looks awesome, running what was a PC-breaking game just a couple of years ago. But one of the biggest differences was in Street Fighter, where the Steam Deck OLED managed a consistent 60 FPS, while the older model only averaged 53. This is the kind of game where the Deck OLED shines. And also, going from 60 to 90 Hz means you get an automatic 50% boost in performance, and in F122, the high refresh meant I averaged 86 FPS rather than being locked to 60. And again, it's just unlocking the potential the Steam Deck always had. Like in Rocket League, where the jump in playability is huge. I mean, sure, the Ally and the Legion get closer to 100 FPS at the same settings, but if you are leaning towards the Deck, this is another reason to grab the OLED model. And as with the original, you can use this frame limit slider to limit your FPS to minimize stutter, and it will automatically double if you play below 30 FPS. So it's a much smoother gaming experience, but the other big upgrade is with the battery. Somehow, despite being the same design overall, they've crammed in a 25% bigger battery and improved heatsink and cooling. which is why this runs quieter and feels cooler as well. The screen draws half a watt less than the LCD, and in my tests, the CPU drew around 2 to 3 watts less than the old deck, depending on the game. All that means the OLED lasted between 25 and 50% longer. Case in point, it managed 3.5 hours of Wreckfest versus just 2 hours on the regular deck, 50% longer. And it lasted just over 25% longer in Rocket League, and that was running at 90 FPS, so with 50% more frames. Now, I am also going to do a full comparison video comparing these 3 handheld gaming PCs because there are pros and cons for each of them. I think if you want the best, most powerful gaming experience, the most versatility, the highest frame rate, the best performance, probably the most future-proofing as well, just in terms of the specs, these two possibly are a better option. The main issue I have with the Legion Go, as nice as it is, it's just too expensive. It's just come out, so actually ROG have discounted this, and it's like a couple of £100 cheaper than the Go. So without jumping too far ahead of my upcoming comparison video, my personal opinion is that it's between these two, and I don't think you can go wrong with either. But certainly for a simpler, less clunky, just easier experience, the Steam Deck OLED is probably the one to go for. So to wrap up, the Steam Deck OLED looks better, it runs for longer, even at higher FPS, downloads are faster, it's cooler, it's quieter, it's lighter, it's a heck of a midlife upgrade, and it just doesn't feel as compromised as the original. And it's enough that I actually want to pick it up and play every time I see it. It does have some tough competition, and for the most recent AAA games, if you want higher settings, you are going to have to get used to 30 FPS, and I would also very much like an auto-resume feature on this, as currently you have to do a full cold boot every time you open a new game. But what do you think? Are you tempted to buy one of these? Have you already bought one? And if so, let me know what your experience is below. Or would you be tempted by one of these? Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you do enjoy this video, a like and subscribe would be fantastic, and I'll see you next time right here on the Tech Chat. All right, let's play some Monkey Island.